Y'all know we've been in Matthew chapter 14, and last week we ended, and just quickly, by way of review, I know. If you have read it, you know that the first 12 verses concern John the Baptist and his death. Herod, because of anger and frustration towards John over John telling him that it wasn't right for him to have his brother's wife, who was also her uncle. A lot of mixed up stuff going on in that family, but just understand, John, as we talked about last week, was willing to stand up and say, look, this is wrong. And even when it cost him everything, he was still willing to stand on principle. And the fact that we as Christians, there's some things that we just can't bend to. Some, obviously, if y'all haven't noticed, and I don't think probably it's escaped any of your attention, the fact that the push now is for us as the church, as Christians, to drop some of these old, antiquated ideas when it comes to different things. Mostly cultural and sexual orientation type stuff. There's others on the list. That's just the main battlefront right now. But the idea is, y'all come on, drop it. It's not worth standing for. There's just some things that I'm sorry we're going to have to continue to stand for. Okay? I agree. There's some things that people get all bent out of shape in the church world over that the Bible doesn't even hardly mention at all. And it's their big thing. And I agree. It's not where we need to plant our flag. It's not a hill to die on. It's not worth it. Okay? There are some things. Here, John the Baptist, calling sin, sin, he wasn't willing to drop that. Okay? He wasn't going to come out and make a public statement that though what Herod was doing by taking his brother's wife, committing adultery, incest, all different kinds of things, he wasn't going to make a public statement and say, there's some gray area here, and so since he's the king, we feel like this is okay. John simply said it's wrong, and he suffered the consequences accordingly. And as I mentioned, we as the church, and especially those of us who are leaders, men that are leaders in their home, we need to be, but all of us really, this extends to everyone, we need to be people of principle. Okay, we need to be people of principle. There is not standards based on situation. It's called situational ethics. There's different names appropriated to it, but just understand, right is right, wrong is wrong, and you can't change those. It's not our law, it's God's law. And there is a big push right now in the church world for us to try to, basically what they're trying to get us to do is to go back and reinterpret Scripture so that it fits with the modern thinking and the modern theology. There's technical terms, but it's what's known as reader response, meaning how I view it. And you think about how many times you've heard Bible studies and things like this, and it's easy to get into this habit, but you'll hear people say, let's read this and then let's all say what this verse means to us. Horrible way of dealing with Scripture. Doesn't matter what the verse means to us. What did God mean when He wrote it? What's the context of it? What is the writer, ultimately God? I know Paul, Matthew, different ones. Yes, they're the ones that penned it down, but ultimately God. What is the writer trying to convey? That's the meaning. Not, let me look at it through the lens of my own personal background and upbringing and ethnicity and sexual orientation and all of those things, and then interpret it in light of all of that stuff. That's horrible hermeneutics, which It's just another fancy way of talking about how we interpret Scripture. Okay? And so just understand, that's where the push is. John, however, in his day, just like we should in our day, should be willing to stand on principle and not back down. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to be arrogant. It doesn't mean that we have to be hateful. It just simply means there comes a point in time where when you push me against the wall and you say, look, say it's like this, I'm going to say I'm not going to say it's like that. You know, there's just a point to which that you can't go past, and they're pushing for it now. Sooner or later, what we do will be labeled hate speech, and it'll eventually get outlawed. And then you watch. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, there will be huge swaths of the Christian faith that will just go ahead and capitulate and do what they tell them to do. I promise you they will. Now, there'll be a lot that stand on principle, but not all. Okay? And so just understand that this was the occasion that John found himself in, ultimately because of her hatred over, and this is always the case, people always hate it when you point out what's right and what's wrong, especially when what they're doing is wrong. I don't know if y'all have noticed that, but it tends to happen. To the point that this lady was so upset, so aggravated, and so hated John for what he had said, that she devised this plot whereby her daughter would dance before the king and get him to agree to give her anything that she asked for. And because she had been instructed by her mother, think of all that she could have had when he uttered that statement, but her vengeance was so strong that she wanted John dead, and that's ultimately what she got. She said she wanted John the Baptist's head in a charger. And after all of this was said and done, and it shows how weak this king is, really, as far as a man, it says, and the king was sorry when she asked this, nevertheless for the oath's sake and them which sat with him at meat, for his image, for his reputation's sake, for the oath's sake. He didn't want to look bad. He didn't want to look weak. And so in turn, he actually displays weakness right here by just going along with what's going on. And it says, and he sent and beheaded John in prison. And as I mentioned last week, and I know I got to hurry, it's kind of a sad ending to what happens, and it's worth noting that this is a one of many places that we can point to and show the Bible's real, because these were not events that you would have written like this if you were making this up. John the Baptist is a hero through Scripture. Jesus talks about the fact that he's the greatest born of woman, and yet we see a death that's almost anticlimactic and almost just kind of sad and pitiful.
If it was a movie or something, there'd be like a big speech or something, but it just says he was beheaded in prison.
He was just hanging out in prison one day. They came in, drug him out, and beheaded him, all because of something that he didn't even know was going on. And it is, again, I'm hurrying, like I mentioned last week, everybody doesn't get a miracle. John didn't get a miracle. John just had to suffer the consequences of being a righteous man, as many others in history have had to do. But now, that's only looking at it from human perspective. John the Baptist is fine, trust me. He's going to be fine. And I think happy that he did and stood for what he stood for. We look at it just from our side and we say, this is kind of sad that John the Baptist would end this way.
We have a crown of glory in heaven by now.
I'm assuming that he will get, and again, Jesus said nobody that gives up house or land or anything will not be paid back 100-fold in the kingdom of heaven. It will be, everything we give will be worth it. And so, of course, and it was done just as the king instructed. His head was brought in a charger or a platter and given to the damsel, and she brought it to her mother. And then it says, and his disciples came and took up the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. And so Jesus, receiving this news, and this is why I just covered this, puts us into the context of what happens in the next passage. And so I'll let y'all start reading here, verse 13 and 14.
When Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart. And when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities.
And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion toward them, and he healed their sick.
Okay. Now, two things to take away from these two passages. We know from the previous verse that the disciples came and told him of John the Baptist's death, and it says when Jesus heard of it. So we know we're following a linear timetable here as we go through this. It says when Jesus heard of it, he departed thence. Now, I think Jesus already knew this. It's not like this is a revelation to him, but just understand he's still human, and because he chose as God to limit himself, he also was able to experience things from a human standpoint. And I know we don't always understand all of that, but just know that that's how it was. But it says that he departed from thence by ship into a desert place apart. And so I think probably Jesus' intentions here were to get some alone time. And actually we will see eventually he finally does get to send this multitude away and spend some time in lonesome and prayer. And I think it's worth mentioning because we almost live in a day where people are scared to death to be alone by themselves. I don't say it a lot, but I think it's worth mentioning because our society lends itself to a constant barrage of entertainment. It does. You think about it. We don't get in the car without turning the radio on. We don't go anywhere without putting in ear pods, or what are they called now? AirPods. Okay. I got it close. And I've got some, so don't think that I'm living in the Stone Age. But, we don't sit at the house without flipping on the television. None of those things. But I still think that it is good, occasionally, to just spend some time alone and in the quiet. I think we need some time to be, A, alone with God in prayer, and B, just some time to think and to reflect. I'm not saying that we zone out like some kind of, Tibetan monk or something like that, but just to think and to evaluate. See, I think there's a plot and a reason behind the fact that we constantly have something going on in our ears and in our eyes and in our mind to keep our mind on worldly things. And I'm not saying that necessarily all of those things are evil things. I'm just saying that they're earthly things. They're things that pertain to earth. And sometimes I think it's good that we just take some time. I'm not saying that you got to go to the mountains for a week or anything and live off the land. I'm just saying take 10 minutes, sit and be still and think about something that's actually meaningful. Even David, the psalmist, wrote, when I consider the heavens. I think David spent some time as a shepherd when he was a young man sitting out there guarding the sheep, considering the heavens, looking around at the world around him, looking at the things that God had made, and spending some time thinking on things that are important, thinking on things that are spiritual, thinking on things that are of significance. It's even a good idea sometimes because we can get caught up in the day-to-day and the entertainment that floods us, to sit down and think about, how am I doing in life? And I don't mean from a success standpoint, like dollars and cents. I'm talking about as a Christian, as a person, my spiritual walk. How are things? If you had to just sit down and just write out a report for this last week, what kind of grades would you give yourself in the areas of study and prayer, contemplation, spiritual things. See, I think there's a reason we don't ever think about that stuff. I think there's a reason that we constantly do something else. It's because if we ever really thought about that stuff, we'd be like, I'm not really doing that good with that stuff. And again, I think we're all guilty of this to a certain extent. But he's going to go into a place alone. And Jesus, understand, he didn't get a lot of alone time. But he did, even he, as focused on the ministry and as much as he poured into everything that he did, still took time to get alone and to pray and to do some of those things for himself. And I think that's important to note, that if the God of heaven incarnate took time to be alone and pray, it might be good for us to do it occasionally as well. But we'll get to that part. But he said he departed into a desert place apart. And again, I think that was for a time of reflection. But it says that when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities into this desert place. Now, again, he had a lot of notoriety and popularity. And these people followed Jesus, and they followed him wherever. And this is right here is why I wanted you to read John chapter 6. Now, we might eventually, one decade, cover the Gospel of John, but just understand, it fills in a lot of the details around the motives of these people. Okay? But we'll discuss that at a later time. But I just when you read John chapter 6, look at how these people thought and how that interaction goes. But it says that the people, when they heard it, they followed him on foot out of the cities. And Jesus went forth and saw a great multitude. And look at this, he was moved with compassion towards them. That's incredible to think about, that God was moved with compassion when he looked on this multitude of people. Again, in his human form, I understand, but still, the fact that he was able to be moved with compassion towards them. And it says, even though I think he's seeking some time alone, I think he's seeking to sit down and think and process the death of John the Baptist and the things that pertains, but it says that he healed their sick. And again, it shows that he was always in a state to where he was wanting and willing to help and to comfort and to do things for other people and to give of himself. You know, most of us, if we lost a close friend or a loved one, we just kind of get like, just leave me alone for a little bit. Let me be. Just let me process. Let me deal with it. Here we see he hasn't even had that ability, and yet he still shows compassion. He was still moved with compassion when he could have been focused only on his own feelings, only on his own needs. He was still moved with compassion, and he healed their sick. Okay, and the story continues here. We'll read 15 through 18.
And when it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a desert place. The time is now past. Send the multitude away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves victuals."
But Jesus said unto them, They need not depart, give ye them to eat.
And they said unto him, We have here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes.
He said, "Bring them hither to me."
Okay. And obviously, if any of us have spent much time around church, and I think most of us have, we all know the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. This is not groundbreaking for us to hear, but it's here for our learning and for our contemplation, and so we're gonna give it the due diligence that it needs. But think about the fact now, and again, I remind you, this was a few years before McDonald's and some of those. Food was not just everywhere. When you went out into a desert, and it says they followed him on foot, so they didn't even take their cars. Okay? They followed him on foot into a desert. When you did that in that day, however far you walked, it was that far back. Okay? That's actually still true today. Okay? But you didn't just stop on the way home and pick up something to eat. There weren't grocery stores. There weren't these type of things. So again, we just sometimes don't think about that because of the conveniences that we have. Let's just face it, none of us have ever worried about starving to death. Now, we say all the time, I'm starving to death. No, you're really not.
You're not even
But
hungry.
yeah, you're just barely starting to get hungry. Okay? But none of us have ever really been concerned about that. None of us have ever really thought, I don't know if I'm going to survive if I can't. It's not really a concern. It was for people in that day. Okay? And in those environments, in that desert environment like there is over there in the Middle East, it's very, very arid, very dry, and you lose a lot of nutrition and a lot of water from your body very rapidly. And so it would be an actual real concern that you wouldn't have anything to eat. And it says that they were in this desert place and the time is now past. They said to send this multitude away that they can go into the villages and buy themselves victuals. That's actually how you say it. I looked it up. Yeah, believe it or not. Okay, that's where that word came from. But meaning provisions, food. Okay, the disciples said, "Look, send this multitude back so that they can get something to eat. It's getting late. They're going to need to do that." But Jesus said unto them, to the disciples, they need not depart. Give you them to eat. Now, a couple of things worth mentioning here. Okay. Jesus knows they don't have any food. Okay. He understands that fully. But at the same time, the disciples have seen up until this point everything that Jesus has done. Okay? It just simply shows that our unbelief is a huge hindrance to us most of the time. Okay?
To that point, not to rag on them because we're the same way.
Yeah.
We've seen God do great things in our lives. And speaking from experience, I've seen Him do a lot in my life. And even still, I'm like, that's a lot. Or, I don't know. Mm-hmm. So,
right.
It's easy to look at them and be like, well, you saw this in person. But I've seen things in my life that I could never explain that I knew were God. And then I'm still kind of like sometimes like, I don't know if it was a lot. I don't know. So, sorry, not to throw you off.
No, again, I think we're all like that because we look at these instances. We look at the children of Israel coming out of Egypt and see, think to ourselves, y'all saw the Red Sea part. Okay? You saw God drown the greatest standing army on the face of the earth at that time like it was no big deal. You've seen all of the plagues. You saw all of these just unbelievable miracles, and now you're standing in the desert saying, oh goodness, there's no way we're going to survive. This is horrible. We don't have anything to eat. And we think, y'all are completely foolish for thinking that God can't take care of you. And yet at the same time, we claim to believe all of those stories to be true. And so many times we think, God simply can't take care of me. It's human nature. It always has been. And so when Jesus, even though, yes, they saw His miracle, they watched Him raise the dead, they watched Him heal the sick, they watched Him do all of these things, they get here, and when Jesus said, give them something to eat, they're standing here murmuring between themselves like, he's a little crazy. We don't have anything. When we in our minds standing here from 1,000,000 miles away look at it and say, well, they should have just said, well, how are you planning for us to do that? Because we'll do whatever you tell us to do. We know you're able. We're the same way. We would have done the same thing, okay? But it says that Jesus said unto them, they need not depart, give them the, and they said unto Him, we have but here 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And of course, we know from the other Gospels that this was a young boy that was there that had these 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And He said, bring them hither to me. Now, just so you know, that's what 5 loaves and 2 fishes look like. Okay? Now.
Bread looks good.
Okay?
Not a lot.
It's not a lot of food. Not a lot of food. That's what 5,000 people looks like. Okay? That's a lot of folks.
Football stadium.
Yeah. But it says, in spite of all this, Jesus said, all right, bring them to me. Bring me the 5 little loaves and the 2 fishes. And I'll let y'all read here, 19 through 21.
And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude.
And they did all eat and were filled, and they took up of the fragments that remained 12 baskets full.
And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, beside women and children.
Okay. Now the picture I showed you was 5,000 people. It says here there were 5,000 men besides women and children. And again, the estimates range, but just I think we can safely and conservatively estimate, 10 to 15,000 easy. Probably more, but we'll keep it conservative. Regardless, even if it was just the 5,000 men. If it was 2,500 of them that said, I don't really like bread and fish, I'd rather have some chicken strips if y'all had those. Okay? If it was today's, that's what it would be like. We
Just
just,
non-GMO.
yeah, we would just as soon starve in the desert if you don't have chicken nuggets or something. Okay? How about some Chick-fil-A? Okay? But it says that he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass. And of course, in the other Gospels, it tells us there was much grass in that place and that people were able to do that. And it says he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and brake. And then he takes those loaves and those fish and he gives them to the disciples. And then he tells them to distribute this amongst the multitude. And I'm sure those guys were saying, like, we're going to have to break like really tiny pieces off of this. I don't know, and the Bible doesn't tell us in any of the accounts, how exactly this miracle took place. Meaning, I think you can get carried away running down the rabbit hole trying to decide what something means when the Bible just doesn't clearly say. But if for no other reason than just to clearly demonstrate once and finally at the end that indeed a miracle happened. When everybody was filled, they took up 12 baskets of fragments. This was more than 12. What he had wouldn't have filled a basket. This is more than 12 times what they started with. So in case anybody was wondering if this was any kind of, well, maybe they just stretched it really good, okay? Maybe it was like really filling. I don't think anybody was like that, but just understand, to clearly demonstrate the miracle, there is now way yonder and above 12 times what they started with when they handed food out, okay? The fact that this happened is undisputable. There's 5,000 witnesses plus the women and children. Everybody that was there believed this happened. And when you read in John chapter 6, and again, that's why I encourage you to read your homework, you'll see their reaction. Their reaction was not one of skepticism. Their reaction was one of, this is a legitimate thing that happened. This is something important. This is something that we need. Okay? So it was undisputed that this was a miracle. But I do want to mention, and I'm not going to get all scientific, but this demonstrates the fact that Jesus is in fact God. Okay?
He manipulated matter. He created it, right?
Exactly. Laws exist in the area of science and physics and the universe.
Cannot create matter.
Matter cannot be created nor destroyed. You can change its state, but the matter is still there. And yet, we see here that matter has been created. The only one that can defy the laws of the universe and do exactly what he wants to do at any point in time must in fact be who? The creator of the universe. Because he's the one that created the laws. Okay? There is no person, no thing other than God that has ever been able to create matter. As fancy and as much as they can do with science and technology today, they still can't create anything. They still can't take nothing and make something out of it. Okay? And that's exactly what happens here. There was not this much matter there when they started, and now there is. Jesus miraculously and spontaneously creates matter, completely defying the laws of the universe. And again, it's not about the science, it's just about the fact that it is in fact a miracle. And so therefore, to try to explain any of the miracles of Jesus or any of the miracles of the Bible completely from a scientific standpoint is useless anyway, because these are outside of the realm of science and the laws of the universe. But we see here that this was the case. They took up the 12 baskets full, and they that had eaten, now it gives us the total. Of course, we knew this all along, that there was 5,000 men besides women and children. Now, there's going to be another occasion where Jesus does a very similar thing with 4,000. Okay? But just understand, this was what Jesus did. And that was a separate occurrence. But this is the miracle now that Jesus has done with all of these people. And we'll see here, and this is why I wanted to bring us through these verses, and I'm actually going to make it as far as I wanted to today for the first time in a while. But I want you to think about this when you read John chapter 6. So I'm really encouraging you this week to read your homework. But verse 22 and verse 23, I'll let y'all read it real quick and we'll talk about it.
And straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitudes away.
And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. Okay.
Again, this reflects all the way back to the point I made earlier. I think Jesus' intention all along was to get this alone time, because here we see even after this, and he took the time to minister to the people. He took the time to teach and to preach to these people and to heal their sick. It says that after this, it's straightway. That means immediately. Jesus constrained his disciples, meaning, yeah, he had to tell them, look, just leave, okay? For just a little bit. He said he had to constrain them to get into a ship and to go before him under the other side. He said, look, I'm coming. Just go.
Go ahead.
Yeah, give me 5 minutes, guys, okay? I'm sure if you had been around Peter for the last, 3 months, you'd be ready for some quiet time too. But it says that while, he says, y'all go on to the other side, while he sent the multitudes away. And you will get the whole context, because again, this particular part, and this is why I think it's important that we put all of the Gospels together when we get a complete picture of the life of Christ, because there's a lot that has to go on. There's a reason that he's sending the multitude away. And there's a lot that actually happens with that multitude that causes him to send them away. And so again, you'll read that in John chapter 6. And it says, and when he had sent the multitudes away, and this is where I think he was trying to get to all along, it says he went up into a mountain apart to pray. Jesus goes and gets himself completely alone up into a mountain. It says, and when evening was come, he was there alone. And again, I think it's important to note, and even the disciples, Jesus at times told them to get you apart and pray. I think it is important that we even as leaders, because it's, again, All of us, though.
Yeah. You're not a leader without God.
Exactly.
And you got to have your time with God.
Right. And the danger of a lot of ministries is that in ministering, we in fact ourselves don't take enough time to be ministered unto. In telling others, and this is something that we all have to think about, in telling somebody else, in telling our children, in telling our spouse, in telling people as a church leader or as a preacher or as a teacher, you need to read your Bible, you need to pray. We need to make sure that when we're telling them to do that, we're doing it too. Because again, it's easy to say, well, I've got enough, I just need to give everybody else some. Well, we're still human, and I heard one person say this. Now it's just kind of a play on words, but when Jesus told the disciples to come apart and pray, he said, if you don't come apart, you'll come apart. And there is some truth in that. If we don't take some time to spend some time alone in prayer and reflection and in study, different things, I think it's all important. I think it is important sometimes to just, like I say, just sit and be quiet and contemplate. After we read a passage of Scripture, to just think on it for a little while, to just process it, to just, again, meditate. Not some kind of out-of-body, again, mystic thing, but just to think and dwell on the things that we've learned and that we've read and that kind of thing. Take some time to pray. Yeah, exactly. But it says that when evening was come, he was there alone. And I think he took some time alone to pray, just like we should. And we'll see, he doesn't stay here long. And in next week's passage, we'll try to finish chapter 14 next week. We'll see here the famous event of Jesus walking on the water to the boat, and we see as Peter tries to do the same. A lot to cover there, but we'll try to cover that as the chapter wraps up, and then chapter 15 is a doozy, so we'll get there eventually. Thank y'all for being here this morning.